Well, there's the symptoms. It don't rev. It's flat as a witch's tit. So let's see what's wrong with it. So we're going to go through this fault. So this is like a bit of a con. So when your car reaches 200,000 kilometers, it starts flashing this fault code, and all you need to do is reset it. Then you've got charging pressure control deviation, back pressure sensor. Probably because if the charging pressure is wrong, the back pressure sensor will be reading wrong. It doesn't mean the sensor's faulty. The real problem is this 1, 2 and 3 actuator position control, charge pressure actuator. It's the motor on the turbo. So the main fault with this is charge pressure actuator position control, charge pressure open too far / positive control deviation. It's done it 87 times, so obviously we've got a fault, haven't we? All this crap you can go through, but there's no real need. It just shows like the boost pressure and the air mass and engine RPM at the time it happened, but rail pressure, we don't really need that. Right, so first thing we're going to do is I'm going to take battery support off temporarily. So on BMW ISTA, you've got all these test plans. There's 3 test plans for this fault, but what always amazes me when they wrote this, they could never conceive that it might just be the fact that the VNT nozzle vanes stick. There's little wings inside, wingtips, and they seize up. And I'll show you exactly what's going on with this one. Right, so what goes wrong with these is, that's the actuator motor. This is the bit that's coming up as having the wrong position. And basically, as you can see, it's completely seized. There should be some free play in that. You should be able to just move it a few mil back and forth. And the problem is that when it gets built up with carbon here, it seizes, and the motor here, it can't go forward and back, and it can't overcome the resistance of this seized part here. But inside this motor, because it's pretty goddamn clever, there's a position sensor, so it knows that it's in the wrong position. Now, the trouble with the turbo VNT, it's like a gearbox, so it's like this car's in 6th gear at 20 mile an hour, so you're not going to get any torque or speed that's in 6. You can probably stall in 6th gear actually, and that's the same sort of thing what's happening here. Right, so we'll go through this nonsense ABL just so you don't have to. So the first test is a functional check. It's going to check, is it moving that flat? Well, it ain't going to work, I'll tell you straight. Second check is going to be the feedback of the charge pressure actuator, so we know that's not going to be working. It's going to be in the wrong position, so it'll have a reference and it'll have an actual. So let's do the charging pressure controller check first. It's just electrical, we don't need to start the engine. Yeah, so we don't need to idle the engine. As you can see, that's the position it was stuck at. You know, when it's moaning about the position, it's stuck at 80%, so it's actually opened in that sense. It's gone to full chat almost. So maximum is 95 and its minimum is 10, and it's stuck at 80.2. So it's buggered. It's as simple as that. The motor is being actuated, but it can't actually do the work. So it actually just gives a reason there now. It says actuation finished, possible causes if set point values are not reached. Lines, connections or wiring faulty. Second one, charging pressure controller faulty or jammed. Well, you've got to do the test plan to find that out. And I'm basing this on that people who don't know what they're doing kind of thing. So if you don't know what you're doing, you need to be careful. You can waste a lot of time. Right, so what I'm hoping with this now is I'm going to disconnect the axle from the turbo. So I'm going to take that axle off. So the motor load then should be reduced, so the motor should actually start swinging. So essentially there should be a lot of free play. As you can see, it's seized completely. So that's the issue. Look, you can see it's seized completely. And you can free it off if you strip the turbo and heat it with oxyacetylene and put some spray on. Now, you see the free play in the motor? That's perfect. You should have that on both sides of the axle. And we don't because it's seized. But never mind, I said I'd scope it and I'll show you how it works. Right, so what we're doing now, we're checking our ground and it's bang on. We're at the positive with the flute meter and we're on the brown signal, the brown ground supply to the sensor, and that's okay. And that's what we're going to do is we're going to check the 5-volt reference voltage. What we've got there is on actually the blue and black. That's the 5-volt power supply or 5-volt reference, 5-volt power supply to the potentiometer. Obviously the green and brown is the ground, and the middle one is the signal output, which we've got nothing because the potentiometer is doing nothing. And obviously these two here are the motor power supplies at the end, the white, big thick white ones. I've got a plan. I'm going to do something pretty cool actually. So we've got a massive problem. I wanted to show you a scope trace, but I can't because there's no pulse width modulated signal to control the motor. So what I just did, I just used a swirl motor, a known good one, and it's basically the same type of motor, a bit less powerful. So in theory it should work. So it was a good idea that, wasn't it? So we've actually used that as a substitute potentiometer. We've disconnected it. We've got a fault code for the motor side that it knows the line's disconnected. We've got a fault for the potentiometer side, so there's no wiring faults on it at all. So that's really useful, isn't it? What I did want to do was want to show you this actually being spun up by the DDE, but it ain't compatible. I haven't got one of them. The turbo's knackered, job done. So in theory, if you took out that pin there, pin 4, and plugged this back in, how can I say, if you took out all them 3 and powered up the swirl one instead, it would free up them wires. Now what the problem is now, the reason this isn't working, this system, the motor won't do anything if it knows the position sensor is in the wrong position, because it don't want to damage the motor. So I dare say that we could get that motor working if we trigger it with a power probe. It is pulse width modulated, and I don't have a PWM driver unfortunately, but if I just put a live and a ground on the motor, it should work. Yeah, if I had, I'm running out of time now, so I have no time, but if I had time to mess around now, I could drive this with a PWM. I think the motor might be okay actually, having said that, but it's inhibited because the position sensor's in the wrong position. So in the end, what I ended up doing was I ended up getting a swirl motor, labelling it up with all the wiring, so I didn't have to think about it. Copied the wiring diagrams and put it in place of that motor. Now, it would have worked this, but the issue is, you would have to move this into a certain position, which would be the start position. Now, I didn't have time, I had an hour and a half, you see. If I had all day, I could do all sorts of other cool stuff on the video. For example, I could move this and watch it on the screen to where the start position is, kind of block it somehow, and then it will be in the start position. Then the DDE would release the motor, and the motor would at least move one way, at least. Well, actually, to be honest with you, once it moves left and right, it will probably keep working. It's just that initially, if you can't erase a fault code for a position sensor in the actuator of the turbo, unless you can put this in the start position of 0% or whatever it is, this won't be released either. That's the reason this wasn't working. So 2 wires weren't working, the motor wasn't working, but the 3 position sensor wires were working. And then when we disconnected, not this wire, but the wire that was on the turbo, the real motor, it set fault codes for the motor and fault for the position sensor. So by doing that, you know straight away that you don't have a fault with your wiring because the DD is recognising it. So why does the motor not work? Well, the motor works with a power probe. This one doesn't work, neither does one on the car. Because the one on the car works, no problem with the power probe, but it won't work because the DD won't allow it to work. Very poor, really, in my opinion. There should be an override with BMW. Or any type of tester where you could just say override and then manually operate it. If you know, as a tester, as a mechanic, as a fault finder, that the motor works, you should be able to override it, but you can't do it, unfortunately. But at least we got the position working, so you kind of know that it's exactly the same motor, just a small power version. I hope you like that video. Please consider subscribing. I've got 10 subscribers now, €4.59 a month. It's not a lot of money. And I'm going to go through classroom based with a little bit of workshop tutorial, but obviously mainly classroom because, time is money and all that. I can't really be doing teaching while I'm actually supposed to be earning money for this company. So let's see how we get on with it. Hopefully get a few hundred subscribers within a year and I'll be as happy as a pig in shit. So just the last thing I wanted to take away, which I totally forgot to put in, was what I'm trying to show you is test everything. We know it's got a physical problem with turbo, but what if it had a wiring fault as well? So by doing all that, by disconnecting the plug and setting fault codes and testing the wires and testing the motor, we know there's no problem with anything. We just need to know how the system works. Well, the system works by, if there's a position sensor fault, it cuts off the power supply to the motor from the DDE, inhibits it completely. So we put a new turbo on that, it'll be fine. It'll be as right as ninepence. You must remember that. Think outside the box and test everything. Know how the system works.